The decisions of the Board of Deacons of the First Congregational Church were understood to be secret until they were announced for the consideration of the full congregation. But it would have been more likely for a whale to blunder its way down Parker Head unnoticed than for this decision to be held secret until Sunday. The tides didn't have the time to change before the recommendation was general information around Phippsburg. When folks came by to wish the minister well, they looked at Mrs. Buckminster with embarrassed eyes, and she, too, knew, though she had known all along, Turner supposed. In the hours while Turner read to his father, he was full along in the descent of man, his mother loudly packed. When they had left Boston, packing had taken weeks, with trunks and crates and loads of straw to cushion whatever might break. Now there was none of that. Turner would push a wheelbarrow up to the front steps, go into the house, and grab whatever she had piled at the foot of the stairs. He carried it out hugger-mugger, books, dishes, the downstairs rocker, all in the great mix, and carted it right down the middle of Parker Head. Turner was glad all the mud had frozen and there was just a patina of frost. Whenever his mother was in Mrs. Cobb's house, Turner would wait by his father's bedside. He'd listen to the slow breathing, try to figure out how he might get down to Pownell, and imagine how his father would awake and come with him to rescue Lizzie Bright, storming the gates like Aeneas himself. Then he'd listen again to the slow breathing. When Turner wasn't watching his father, he translated the Aeneid. He figured his father would want him to be keeping that up. Or he walked along the far coast away from Malaga Island. One late afternoon, he met Willis standing alone above the Kennebec, and together they climbed down to the water, cracked sheets of ice from the rocks, threw stones from the beach through the wave troughs to skip them before the white water buried them. Turner soon took to going down there most afternoons, and more often than not, Willis was there too. They always began the same way. Hey. Minister about the same? About. Willis would nod, and then they would head to the shore, even when the wind scudded up and drove the salt spray at them, even when a new snow covered the beach so that they couldn't find any stones, even when it was so cold they had to wrap their scarves around their faces. It was Willis who told Turner about the graves over on Malaga Island, how Mr. Stonecrop had hired men from the shipyards to dig up the markers, then hack through the frozen ground to the coffins, or what was left of them. How the workers jumbled everything they found into 5 caskets and carted them off the island. I never saw anyone working up in the church cemetery, said Turner. But Turner shook his head. Down to Pownell, he said. The town couldn't let Negroes in the church cemetery. Turner couldn't help thinking of Lizzie's grandfather, dug up and tossed around, not allowed to stay on the island where he had seen the sun rise and set 10,000 times. 2 days later, Turner didn't need Willis to tell him what was happening on the island. Mr. Stonecrop's workers were not yet finished. The Easton home had already been burned to the ground, but now fire was set to the Griffin home, and one by one to every house, shack, privy, pier, barrel, stack of lobster traps, everything that could burn on the island. White smoke covered Malaga, and then the sea breeze, being what it was, the smoke blew inland, crossing the new meadows and drawing up the granite ledges. Still roiling and billowing, it pushed through the woods and came out in torn clouds from the trees and gathered down Parker Head. It passed Mr. Newton's grocery, past Mrs. Cobb's house and Mrs. Hurd's house, past the parsonage, and then circled around First Congregational until it rose up to the top of the steeple. It went on to Mr. Stonecrop's fine house, passing through the wrought iron fence and coming up onto the fine front porch. And everything the cloud touched, it left ashes. On the street, on the houses, on the church steeple, even on Mr. Stonecrop's fine porch. Ashes fell on the pine boughs, on the bare limbs of the maples and aspens, on the dried brown leaves of the oaks, on the snow. Folks who had to go out held handkerchiefs to their faces and walked quickly. Most stayed in. Turner, between carrying books from his father's study, watched it all from the cold cupola of Mrs. Cobb's house. The smoke came in, he thought, as if it knew what it wanted to do. He wondered what Lizzie might think about that. He figured she would smack him on the shoulder and tell him to see things straight. But maybe he already did. The ashes fell against the books Turner carried down Parker Head that afternoon. With each load, Turner felt he was leaving something behind, and though he could not say why, he felt lighter. It no longer mattered to him how the people of First Congregational voted. He imagined that his father would hardly care either. Maybe they would leave Phippsburg. Once his father was conscious again, they could go down to Pownell, pluck Lizzie Bright from the asylum, and leave forever. Maybe they would head out for the territories after all. But the next new snow covered the ashes on the trees, covered the ashes on the houses, covered the ashes on the steeple of First Congregational, and covered the ashes Turner had strewn over the newly dug grave of his father.